Good evening. Is it ready? Good evening. Am I not on yet? Can you hear me? Okay, got it. So thank you very much for joining us here this evening. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Bob Shear. I'm the superintendent here of the North Allegheny School District. And we certainly welcome you to this discussion here tonight. And certainly given the timeliness around some of the things that we as a district are exploring, we're just grateful to see this kind of a turnout. We had about 250 people who were registered for tonight. We expect a few additional walk-ins, and so we certainly want to be mindful of your time, the commitment you've made to be here this evening, so thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I do want to take a moment and just go over a few housekeeping items. The first really is all of you should have received a flyer when you came into the auditorium this evening. The flyer just gives you some very high-level information, some of which we'll discuss here tonight. It also has some space for some notes. But on the back of the flyer at the bottom, there are some directions if you're interested in using a tool called Slido. Slido is a way for you to electronically ask some questions. We are also live streaming this. So right now, if you are at home and were unable to make it this evening, you are seeing what is taking place, and you can ask questions from home that will then be addressed later on as well. This session will be recorded. So at a later date, if you want to come back and take a look at some of the responses of some of the panel members today, you can certainly do that. And if you aren't aware of Marshall Middle School, if you walk out the door to the left, those are where the restrooms are located. So if you do need to leave, we certainly understand that. And if you signed up for childcare, we do have childcare here available this evening, and that is also outside the door and to the left. And I know a lot of our high school students were down there very excited to see the young people walking in. The other thing I want to point out is we are going to be very mindful of your time tonight. So we have structured this agenda very strategically, and there will be a hard stop tonight at 8:30 for a variety of reasons, one of which is because so many young people are down the hall watching younger children. But I also want to be clear that as we get into the question and answer phase tonight, there will be ways that if you did not have a question answered, you can actually type it in electronically in Slido, and then we will work over the next few days to answer those on an FAQ page on our website. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear. So this is really what the evening is going to look like. We're going to start with a 30-minute overview presentation, really to frame why we're here tonight, why we're having this discussion. Why are we looking at school start times and grade weighting? What does the research say about these issues? What are some of the possible recommendations that are being considered? And then really, how can you, as a community member, as a parent, as a staff member, and even some students that are here tonight, how can you provide your feedback in this process? And then really shifting at 7:30, and this I would argue is the main reason why we're here. We have 6 panel representatives, 3 for school start times and 3 for grade weighting, who we're looking at as the experts in this area. We have not tried to position ourselves as experts. We have been learning throughout this process, and we wanted to invite people who really could answer some of those deeper questions that you may have regarding some of these items. So to begin, if you're not aware, during the 16-17 school year, one of our end results committees really started to look at unpacking student stress and academic pressure and trying to identify the factors that were associated with that. And so we met with over 300 students, and that was involving many of our school counselors, administrators, myself, some of my team members, to really talk to students about some of the things that were causing them stress. We also had 2 parent focus group meetings. And if you're not aware, we have 12 standing committees that we typically meet with on an ongoing basis. Superintendent Parent Liaison Committee, the Secondary Advisory Council, Citizens Advisory Council. So these discussions were taking place with a lot of the different groups that we meet with on an ongoing basis. And this was also being done around the same time that we were really looking at how do we want to measure success at North Allegheny, because it is so much more than just test scores and rankings. And so we were also going down this road of developing the Measuring Success Framework, which most of you in this room have seen before. And so if we're looking at that quadrant focusing on student and staff wellness, that's really where this conversation is rooted. It's rooted in this idea of how can we work with students to make sure that we are having an environment where they can be healthy, they can continue to succeed, and aren't falling into some of the challenges that some were verbalizing to us in terms of stress and academic pressure. And so some of the findings when we met with the students and talked with those focus groups and our standing committees was really there's a variety of in-school and out-of-school factors. And some of those things that we're going to need to work with parents and community members on, because sometimes we create this stress for our students. You know, I'm a parent of 2 students in the district. I have a student at Nash and a student here at Marshall Middle School. And so I'm sitting in your same seat here day in and day out and watching that experience through the eyes of my own children. And so the root causes were identified and things started to emerge. And as the committee started to look at the various feedback, we looked at this really on 2 parallel paths. On one path, stress is a part of life. That's a reality. None of us in this room can say that we are stress-free. But many of us have figured out strategies in terms of how to manage that and how to deal with that. And so we chose to go down this road of mindful practices. And so we have a plan in place this year where we are training staff members in mindful practices to then eventually take that out to at the student level as well. And if you were at our Community Connections seminar a few weeks ago, you had an opportunity to meet Joni Sturgill, who is leading that work with our educators in the district. And then the second pathway was really examining some of those systemic factors that we have here in the district. Because sometimes well-intended ideas or systems, et cetera, have unintended consequences. And so this is really where tonight's conversation finds itself. And so the 4 systemic factors that the committee chose to explore and move forward with were looking at school start times for a variety of reasons, grade weighting at the high school level, homework, and testing. And I would probably argue that homework was one of the items that was mentioned most often. But as we started to look at how do we tackle these 4 items, if we were going to do something to impact the 18-19 school year, we really had to make some decisions about the first 2 items by mid-year. Because if we're going to do something around grade weighting changes potentially, that has to be in our program of studies, which we put in the hands of students in February. If we were going to make a change to school start times, the research says you need at least a 6-month window to make sure you educate parents in the community. So there was a reason why we tackled these 2 items first and wanted to make sure that that was the path that we went down. And so if you've been part of some of these other stakeholder meetings recently, you've seen this timeline, and this timeline has been shared with folks via some of the other communications that we send to families. And so you sort of see where we are. Our end result committee has met throughout the year. We've gathered some additional feedback from our stakeholder groups. We did provide a preview of what you're seeing here tonight with the board last evening. And then we have 2 public forums. One forum here tonight and a similar forum. Pretty much the panel, about half the panel members will be joining us again next week, and some additional ones will come along as well. Monday night at Carson Middle School. So the idea is that we had 2 opportunities for people to come out. Tonight's being live streamed. We wanted to make sure we were educating as many people as we could around these 2 topics. But really the important piece is next week, all of you are going to receive a survey, an electronic survey. It's going to go out to all of our staff members. It's going to go out to all of our parents. And it's also going to go out to our students in grades 5 through 8. Now, students in 5 through 8 are just going to answer questions around school start times. And students in grades 9 through 12 will answer questions on both areas. The idea is we wanted everyone to have a voice in this process. And then what we're going to do is the committee will take the feedback that is collected, and then we'll share that with the board along with potential recommendations at the December board meeting. The idea there is the board really wants to look at this sort of in 2 phases. Based upon that feedback, is there the appetite to continue going further? And then if there is that appetite, what are some of those specific recommendations going to look like? And so you see there we have some time built in on the January 17th work session if we need to provide additional information. And then we're asking the school board to vote on any potential recommendations in January, at the end of January. And again, the recommendations may be keep things the way they are, or the recommendations may be a change in one or the other or both. The idea is, though, we want everyone to have a voice in this process, so your feedback will help guide what those eventual decisions become. So what I'd like to do is take a few minutes and really talk at a high level what some of the research says around some of the items that we're talking about here today. So when we start to look at school start times, we know that the 3 organizations you see up there do all recommend school start times of 8:30 or later for adolescent students. And really this is research that has emerged and evolved over the last 20 years. We also know that the AAP recommends a certain amount of sleep for various students in various ages each and every night. And it's challenging to get that. We look at that and probably chuckle and say, wow, it's hard for just about anybody to reach that, but that is the ideal. And we know nationally 30% of high school students are saying that they're just not getting enough sleep. And so the challenge is also in some of the sleep cycle shifts for adolescents that really makes it difficult to fall asleep before 10:45, and then the brain really doesn't activate back up until 8 a.m. in the morning. And that's challenging then when you're talking about a school start time here at North Allegheny and a lot of other schools in the region, so we're not unique in this regard, that starts at 7:25. And so really the science behind it is it's a matter of biology, not necessarily a matter of choice. And here are some of the consequences, and this is really why we're talking about this. So if we're saying that student health and wellness is important, all of those things on the left-hand side of the slide are critical in this work. Insufficient sleep leads to things like depression, suicide, substance abuse, increased risk-taking. We don't want to be the next school district that has a suicide cluster. We have a high-achieving district. Kids work very hard here, but it also starts to create an environment where those things can occur. That's where this work is rooted. Car crashes are a cause of insufficient sleep, weight gain, obesity, and sports injuries. And so really we're focusing on the left-hand side of the slide, but there are also academic benefits. But we've been very clear to say that the conversation is not about higher test scores, higher grades, et cetera. This conversation is rooted in student wellness. And that's why we're talking about school start times. And this graphic represents school start times. Now this is for the last school year in 16-17, but you can see North Allegheny is not unique. So this is a regional challenge that a lot of schools are looking at, and a lot of schools are having a similar discussion that we're having right now as well, particularly in the northern tier, because we know that when a number of schools go down this road together, it's a lot more palatable for everyone. And so we're trying to create some of those conversations and really having that not just here at North Allegheny, but in the region, but focusing on our kids, because our students are the students at North Allegheny. So what are some of the barriers? So if you look at the research, it's clear. Number one, when you particularly look at the secondary level, it has to do with athletic schedules. And so we had a meeting a few weeks ago with the athletic director, myself, the assistant superintendent of K-12, and we tried to unpack this. And so yes, there would be some challenges, but we don't think that there are significant barriers to implementing something like this. And so we think that if that is the direction that we go down, that is something that can certainly be managed. Transportation, sometimes that becomes a concern. Some of the potential recommendations we're looking at are cost neutral. It's just shifting sometimes, and in some other cases we're looking at a different way of actually transporting students to schools, which would require some additional costs. We also know that younger children, if you're looking at flipping the day, and elementary is the first schools that start, may be waiting for a school bus in the dark, and so we've got to think through some of those challenges as well. Childcare, we know that some older siblings provide childcare for younger siblings when they come home from school. So again, these are some of the barriers, as well as current parent schedules and how they might align with student schedules. That becomes a challenge. And finally, and this is a challenge in just about everything we do in education, it's about tradition. It's the way we've always done it. And so sometimes we need to sort of think through, okay, just because we've done it this way for a number of years, is it the right way to do it? So those are some of the reasons why we're talking about school start times and some of the things that the research says. Now, in terms of grade weighting, and grade weighting might be a somewhat new concept, particularly if you're a parent that doesn't have any students at the high school level, but many of us probably experienced this when we were in high school as well. So if you're not aware, students who currently take honors and AP level courses have additional weights applied to their grades. And so an A in an AP course is weighted more than an A in an honors course, which is weighted more than an A in a regular course, to sort of look at it at a very high level. And there's a reason for that. Those courses are more rigorous, they have extended workload, and that's language right from our program of studies. But as we were talking to students last year, and even parents, a lot of them were saying, I'm taking all of these weighted courses, these honors and APs, not because I really am excited about that particular piece of content, but I'm just trying to get the highest GPA that I can, because it's going to make me look good when I apply to colleges. And so that was right out of the mouths of the students. And so grade weighting also encourages grade and course acceleration in some cases where it may not be appropriate for some students, but they're playing the GPA game. It does foster the myth that students need to take as many of these courses as possible just to get into college. For some colleges, yes, they are looking at what is that level of rigor that you're taking. But for a lot of other colleges, I think sometimes the expectations that some students and families have really are very different than the expectations those colleges and universities have for those students. And students were telling us that they're often not taking courses because of that that are more in line with what it is that they want to do with their lives. And so we're really focusing, you saw the Measuring Success framework earlier, future preparation is a big piece of that. What are we doing around career awareness, career readiness, and college readiness, and really helping kids find what it is that they're passionate about and helping move them through their education in a way that gets them to that end result. And right now, a lot of students were telling us, well, I'm really not doing that because I'm just focusing on these weighted courses. And then the reality is that many colleges and universities, and not all, but many colleges and universities, unweight the grades anyway because it's challenging for them. When a student applies, the way we weight at North Allegheny is different than the way they weight it in Mount Lebanon. It's different than the way they weight in another school in another state or another country. And so they need to look at apples and apples, and so it's something that they remove in many cases to begin with. So what are some of the barriers to change there? Well, even those colleges that do sometimes remove those weights do look at the weighted grades for scholarship purposes. So maybe it doesn't affect the admissions process, but it affects the student's opportunity to get additional monies. And so again, we don't want to try to solve one problem and then create another problem. So that's a potential barrier we really need to think through, and why we have some of the folks here tonight. Ensuring the colleges and universities, if we were to make a change, we'll clearly understand what that now looks like, because we have great relationships with the colleges and universities, particularly in this area, but throughout the United States. They know the way we do things at NA. They understand the current system, and so there would be a re-education there, as well as for our parents, particularly parents who've had students move through the system in the past, making sure that everybody was very clear about what it is that we were doing potentially different if that would be the case. And so, what I'm going to share with you, again, at a high level are some potential recommendations. And I want to be clear, because when you do take the survey next week, you know, these are not all fixed. These are essentially concepts and ways to take a look at it, but we felt it was appropriate to put times associated with it, because you kind of need to see what that start time and what that end time might look like. And so there was 4 if you were at the board meeting last night, but we were asked to put together a 5th scenario, and I'll share that with you here in a minute. So one is to maintain our current school start times, and you see the school start times there. That's what they are currently today. Another option would be to then push all school start times back, where then you start high school at 8:15, and then it's a domino effect when you look at the other schools. A third choice is to sort of change the order of school start times, where elementary students would go first. Now, we would shift that so they wouldn't go as early as 7:25, but we would be looking at a 7:45 start, and then load high school and middle school into the mix. And so all 3 of those situations really look at transportation in a very similar way. That's currently our load model, 3 different runs. The next 2 scenarios are the ones that would cost a little bit more to implement, because what we would do is essentially condense from 3 bus runs down to 2 bus runs. And high school and middle school students would ride the bus together, which is common in many school districts. It's not common here. It's not something we do, but it is common in other places. And the first model you see there actually starts elementary school at 8 a.m. and it goes till 2:30. And the second model starts middle and high school at 8:40 and goes to 3:30. The challenge, though, is we need a greater capacity in terms of our transportation, the busing, et cetera. And we have worked some models out where it looks like that would be roughly $1 million increase to the general budget. So we have to know that going into that if that's palatable for folks, that could be an option. And then the 5th option is similar, but it's actually loading schools in a similar way that we're currently loading them. In this case, we would condense from 3 to 2. We would start middle and high school at 8 a.m., and then we would start elementary schools at 9:05. And the reason for that is you can't just look at the beginning times, you have to also look at the ending times. Our elementary day is slightly shorter than the high school day, and there's a reason for that. The state says you have to have 900 hours of instruction up through high school, and it has to be 990 hours at the high school level. And we actually did another analysis this morning, and the challenge is right now our current schedule, the way it stands at the high school, we don't have any flexibility. And so what you see there is a way then still to have 45 minutes at the end of the day to do all of your middle and high school runs and then be able to get back and do your elementary runs. So a little bit of context in terms of that fifth example. In terms of recommendations around grade weighting, one is to maintain our current grade weighting policy. The second is to give AP and honors courses the same weight. The rationale behind that was some students were saying, you know, I probably should be taking an honors course, but I'm taking the AP course because I want the higher weight for that course. And so that might be an option. One would be capping the number of courses can receive, the number of courses a student can receive weights for. And there's a little clarifying bullet there. That doesn't mean we cap necessarily the number of courses a student could take. What it means is they would only be able to earn weighted grades up to a certain number. Logistically, that becomes very much a challenge, but we wanted to make that an option that people could weigh in on. And finally, eliminate all weighted grades completely. So here's now how you're able to provide feedback. So I mentioned before that all of you in this room, all of our staff and students in grades 5 through 8 are going to receive a survey next Tuesday. That window is open for 8 days. The reason for that is really, we've talked to folks in the research community and say once you open it longer than that, people just forget about it. But it also then gives us time over the Thanksgiving break and up until that December board meeting to take some time to really analyze the information. The survey is being developed by Hanover Research, so we're actually working with an outside company to do this. It's a relationship that we have with them, and we've literally been tweaking that survey on a daily basis based upon some feedback that we've been receiving from board members and other folks as well. But the questions will ask you to rate your perceptions of various school start times. You'll be asked to give your perceptions of the current start times. Are they too early? Aren't they too early? They'll be able to indicate your agreement or whether you support or oppose some of those recommendations. And then you can see some of the questions that will be asked in terms of grade weighting as well. And if you're not comfortable answering some of those questions, because maybe grade weighting is something that's foreign to you, you can skip past those questions. You don't need to answer them, but we wanted to give you the opportunity to do so. And then a big piece, and this came out in some of our stakeholder groups, is to really make sure we had some open-ended response space for everyone. So not only in grade weighting, but also in school start time, so that if there's some nuance that you want to provide that isn't available in the questions that are being asked, you have the opportunity to do that. And then as I mentioned before, the feedback will really help inform those recommendations that are eventually shared with the board. And so I wanted to get through that relatively quickly just to sort of give everybody the context in terms of why we're having this discussion tonight. But really, the next phase is why I think most of us are here tonight. And so the purpose of this session is to really help all of us in this room, myself included, to build understanding around these issues and to really help you inform some of your own opinions. We know this can be very polarizing on both topics, and we don't expect there to be consensus. And so we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to dig into this in a way that helps them make meaning. And so what you'll have an opportunity to do today is to ask specific questions of the 6 panel members, which we'll introduce here in just a minute, because they're the ones that are well-versed in this space. And that will be actually facilitated. Jeff Krakoff to my right, your left, if you want to raise your hand, Jeff. So Jeff Krakoff, we work with Krakoff Communications and some of the things that we do here in the district, a lot of our back-to-school publications. He also works with us in the district around some unique issues such as this. And so he's actually going to facilitate this discussion. And so what he has is he has 2 microphones. So he's going to be moving through the room. All you have to do is raise your hand. He will come around to you. You'll be able to orally ask your question, but he's also going to facilitate it so that there's balance in the questions that are being asked today in terms of both of these issues. You can also go on to Slido. And if you're at home listening to this right now, you can go on to Slido as well. You can ask your questions electronically. And then Emily Schaefer from our Public Relations and Communications specialist here in the district, she's actually going to be looking at those questions. And you can like different questions. And the idea is that we're going to try to put those questions that most people seem to really want answered, and you'll see those questions up on the screen, and then those will be addressed. And then any questions that we don't get to will be archived. Again, we will add those answers on an FAQ on the website. It will also be an opportunity after tonight. If you go home and think of another question, you can add it at that time. And so what I'd like to do is if I would invite our 6 panel members forward, if they want to come forward and have a seat, and I will begin to introduce them as they get to their seats. So the first table to my left here is 3 representatives around school start times. First we have Dr. Franzen, Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, who actually does, much of his specialty is in sleep science. Liz Rambo, who is the Western Pennsylvania chapter leader for Start School Later. And then the other person at the end of the table is Dr. McClung. She's Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Clinical and Translational Science at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and she also happens to be an NA parent. The other table on the other side of the stage, we have David Debor, the Assistant Director of Admissions from Carnegie Mellon University. We have Jeffrey Peacock, the Associate Director of Admissions from Duquesne University, and Lacey Nettleton, the Assistant Director of Admissions from Clarion University. And so I'm at this time going to turn this over to Mr. Krakoff for the facilitation piece. And I'm going to bring up the Slido program so that you can start to see some of the questions that folks are asking. And then those will be queued up as we move through this process. So at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Jeff Krakoff.
Thank you, Dr. Shearer. As he had mentioned, we don't have a lot of rules here other than we do have a hard stop at 8:30. I am going to go back and forth from Slido. And for those of you watching at home, streaming, please send in your questions. If you're here right now and don't want to talk in front of the group, definitely sign up. Get on, there were instructions on the flyer when you entered. Send us your questions. And let's try to get through as many of these as we can and be respectful of time so that we can get through as many questions as possible. So I will start with the first question on Slido. If the issue of biological and high school students simply cannot get to sleep before 10:45 p.m. and cannot reasonably function before 8:30 a.m., then how can we explain the phenomenon of daylight savings time, very timely? For 26 weeks out of the school each year, the start time at North Allegheny is actually 8:25. Who would like to take that one?
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, so that's a good question about what happens when we have shifts in our time, when we go on to daylight savings time or when we come off. So it's actually better for our adolescents the way we just shifted because it allows you to get a little bit more sleep because we fell back. And then you see the opposite problem when you spring forward. And in fact, when you just look from a public health perspective, when you shift forward in the spring, you see higher rates of car accidents that happen on the road and higher rates of heart attacks. This isn't just in kids, this is in people in general. So just 1 hour shifts can have an impact on our function. But generally, people will adapt to a 1 hour shift. So we know this from work that's done in studying things like jet lag, and how many hours have you traveled east or west, and how long does it take you to adjust back to the time when you return home. And a 1 hour shift isn't that bad. People recover from that within a couple days. What's, I think, more interesting is that if we look at the pattern of the typical adolescent, starting in middle school and getting worse in high school, is that kids typically develop what we call a sleep debt throughout the week. So they get less sleep because they're staying up, socializing, doing schoolwork, having trouble falling asleep, but they have to wake up early for school. So they do that throughout the week. They get a sleep debt that grows, and then the weekend comes and what happens? They start to oversleep. And that oversleep can happen by 2 to 3 hours or more on the weekend. That's actually much more harmful than just a 1 hour shift that's a one-time change in the sleep schedule. And they're doing that every single weekend, and we call that social jet lag. So when you have a time that happens on the weekend where you sleep later. And what we know is that social jet lag, the kids who have that the most, that have the biggest shifts on the weekend, they're more likely to have problems like depression, substance abuse, do more poorly in school. So although I do think these shifts by time matter, I think what's happening with the typical adolescent pattern where they're sleep deprived during the week and oversleeping on the weekend is actually more of a problem.
Okay. Who in the audience would like to go first? Okay, I see a gentleman in the back. I will come to you, and whenever you're done, just please pass the microphone back to the aisle. Here you go.
Thank you. Could I ask, many of the sleep societies recommend up to 12 hours for elementary age kids. What school start time do you recommend for kindergartners and first graders? Because some of these suggestions are relatively early if you want to get your kindergartner 12 hours of sleep.
So I actually don't think there's a really good research base that suggests what's the best time for earlier kids to go to school. But what we do know is that elementary school students are awake and ready to learn at a younger age than our middle school and high school students. So in essence, what we're doing with our the typical schedule where the high school students go earliest is we're sending them to school on their biological night. And if you look at falling asleep in the classroom, there's a lot of falling asleep in the classroom that happens in the morning. In fact, we did a survey at a school district, a local school district, and this district happened to start at 7 in the morning, and 42% of the respondents reported falling asleep at least once or more in their morning classes, and about 35% of them reported falling asleep in their afternoon classes. So, so the issue is, though, is it too early for some of the schedules that you have? And I haven't actually examined what all of the recommendations are, but there could be a risk if the kids aren't going to sleep. Younger kids, we don't want to send them to school too early that they're not getting enough sleep, but generally we think they're ready to be awake and learn at an earlier time than our high school students are, so relatively speaking.
Okay, did you have a follow-up question?
I guess from any of the panelists, I mean, do you think it's healthy for elementary school kids to start school at 7:25? It's a yes or no question.
Personally, I don't think anybody should have to be anywhere before 8. But I would say, from what I've read, and I'm not a scientist, 7:30 is about as early as you want the younger kids in school. I mean, there's definitely, you know, having them in school at 7 or 6 or 5 is much too early, even though some of my children were up at those hours. So what I've read, around 7:30, we don't want to go much earlier than that for anybody.
Okay. Let's go back to Slido. Can you, oh, another one reached the top. Has the calculation been considered where the unweighted GPA is calculated and then a bonus is added for weighted courses? This removes the penalty for taking an unweighted course and still reward students for taking honors and AP courses. Other neighboring school districts are exploring this.
Is that a question for the school district or for the panel?
Well, what, from your perspective, you see a lot of transcripts from a lot of different schools.
Yes, we do.
How do you look at this?
This is a very hot topic amongst all school districts, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us here today. It's something that, you know, at Duquesne University that I can speak to, obviously. You know, we take a very holistic approach when it comes to reviewing applications. So while this is a very important topic when you're talking about GPAs, we're going to look at everything that a student submits. So I think the GPA, what that shows a student is more of a qualifier for acceptance purposes, but we're going to dive into the courses, the AP, the rigor, everything that a student submits when we look at accepting a student. So we want to see really what a student has to present entirely, not just what the GPA is. I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
Sure, I can speak at least from within in our office at Carnegie Mellon. We take an approach to admission that's both individual and contextual, which means we make our admission decisions based on the merits of an individual student in the context of their high school environment. And to put it into perspective, like my colleagues up here, we get a lot of different transcripts. We in particular get applications from more than 40 different countries. So we see all kinds of grade scales, all different types of grading systems. And GPA is a number we see. It's something we review, but we're much more concerned with the courses a student's taken. We want to see that a student has taken whatever the most challenging courses they have access to are, at least from our perspective and our vantage point. And we want to see that they're doing well. So the grades that the students are earning and the courses they're taking tells us a lot more than just the GPA alone, but it's just one factor or one data point used in the process. We don't use a sort of a matrix where it's a GPA and certain test scores and sort of determines a decision. Our process is really much more comprehensive, much more holistic than that.
Okay, great. Who else here has a question already? I'm going to try to get to everybody we can tonight, so please be patient.
This might be more of a question for the school district, but I'm curious about, when I was in high school, in order to take an AP course, you had to take the honors prerequisite. So if you wanted to take honors or AP physics, you had to have been in the honors physics course and so forth. Is that something that they're considering also, like, do
So the short answer is yes, we do.
And I guess I'll answer the question from the district's perspective, and then we'll certainly jump in. I guess one of the things that we're going to try to do tonight is when there are questions that are specific to the school district that you see up on slide, those will be questions that are perfect for the FAQ, because I also want to be mindful of the 6 folks that we have here today. But we do have a process in place right now where students do take the next course in the sequence. There are certain prerequisites that they need to meet, but the district also has a waiver process. And the idea behind the waiver process is if you're missing maybe one of those elements, there is a way to still get into that next class. Because there might be some extenuating circumstances where that would be an appropriate course for the student. But we also know that sometimes students are waiving into some courses that might not be the best fit for those students. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. You don't want to take away opportunities for students, but you also want to be careful that you're placing students in courses that are appropriate with their prior experiences and their prior academic record.
Okay, let's move to this side of the room. Yes.
So, yeah, I have a question about these GPA things. I think principal, right, or superintendent, right? He mentioned that the students, many of the students that they report, they only pick a particular class because it has a weighted GPA. I'm kind of doubt on that because I met a lot of students. They really loved the classes they took. I cannot believe like the majority of students, they just take the class because they just want the weighted GPA. Then, so my question is, if we discuss about this, even you get rid of all this weighted GPA, those students will get stressed out on something else. Just like, the gentleman from Carnegie Mellon, he mentioned, the college looking at the class students are going to, attend. Then they not necessarily just look at the GPA. They look at how rigorous of the curriculum is. I mean, those students who don't have the right attitude, will they get stressed out in the same way? Even we just try to release the stress on them.
Could you rephrase the question for us?
Well, what I heard was if you take away the weighting, people are still looking at more difficult courses versus maybe easier courses. And will students become stressed about something else? But from your perspective as admissions folks, maybe a good way to talk to the audience is your perspective. We're focused here on North Allegheny. But again, you're considering people from not only throughout the Pittsburgh area, throughout the state, throughout the country, sometimes internationally. Where will NA students stack up, in your opinion, if the weighting goes away?
I feel like for most of us, it truly just depends on the student. Depending on the classes that they're taking. And whether it is AP or honors, regardless, if they're a good student, that's going to show on their transcripts and the classes that they're taking, whether they are AP or honors. And so truly, with the weighting, it's kind of that fine line. For most of us, and I'm sure we'll get this question later, when it comes to say scholarships or honors level programs and things like that, where a student might meet that with a weighted GPA, they might not with an unweighted GPA. And so truly, we are going to look at the classes, the grades, the test scores, everything holistically. But for us, if I receive a student who meets the honors level weighted, and that's the GPA that we're given, then we're going to accept them into the honors program. But if we're getting one that, maybe is from NA or elsewhere that isn't weighted, we are truly going to use the GPA that we're being given. And so, again, there's kind of that fine line where if they're meeting it with the weighted score, if we are receiving that unweighted, we, at least at Clarion, are not going to recalculate that. We're going to use the GPA provided to us by the school district. look at the classes, the AP, the honors, everything the student has taken since freshman year. And so, it's kind of a pro and con, where it's great that they have the opportunities to take those classes. I would still always encourage students to take those classes. The weighting to us, though, we're truly going to be looking at the GPA that we're being given and not so much, recalculating and diving in and dissecting everything, but we're going to look at, everything that they've taken as a whole.
Very good. Yeah, agreed. And just from a Duquesne standpoint, too, we spend more time looking at a student's transcript, curriculum. We spend a lot of time on high school student profiles to learn about their grading systems. Then we do the GPA. So the GPA, like I said before, is a nice qualifier. It shows that they're being successful, but then when we're really looking at what that student is, we really want to see the courses they're taking. So if they do have AP, Honors, Advanced, those are great indicators of student success, which it all goes back to at this point. We want to see students that can be successful at Duquesne University, and that's shown by how they're doing in high school, not just a weighted or an unweighted GPA.
I will add that, while we, like I said, when we review applications in our office, we're looking pretty much at the grades the students earn in the course and are removing the weighting in that sense. We read applications by college or by program. So I always tell students it's important as you're conducting your college search to ask questions of what colleges expect for different types of programs, because our best students who are interested in computer science are usually chomping at the bit to take calculus and post-calculus theoretical math courses. But students applying to our School of Drama probably can't wait to drop those courses so that they can focus on their artistic training. A student interested in our humanities and social sciences college probably has some, is interested in calculus, but they might be interested in some statistics courses or additional social studies courses. So we're really looking at, is a student taking the kinds of classes that relate to what they're thinking of studying in college? Are they, focusing on trying to discover the types of courses, the types of material that they're going to be dealing with at a higher level? And focusing our efforts there as opposed to just on sort of the numerical qualifier.
So I'm hearing all three of you say there's a lot of individualized thinking. The student, the program, your institutions. Are you noticing a trend of submissions, applications, of fewer having weighted grades? What's happening in the last couple of years from the applicants that you're seeing?
It's a mix. We are seeing more and more schools having these types of forums, though, I can tell you that. So more and more schools are looking to going back to a traditional 4.0 scale or not weighting GPAs. But again, like I said, we'll look at everything. So we spend a lot of time making sure that every student has the same opportunities for acceptance, not just because of whether they're weighted or unweighted.
Right. So, can you speak to the results that are being recognized by other schools in Allegheny County who have implemented later school start times?
The only school I know of that has implemented later, well, there are two, Avonworth and Quaker Valley. Quaker Valley only by about 15 minutes. Avonworth, I think closer to an hour. And I have not spoken to the principals at those schools yet this school year. Those changes were both implemented at the beginning of this school year. So I don't know if they have any data yet. I'm waiting because the first few months of any change are sometimes a bit chaotic. So I didn't want to bug them too much. But I'm also interested to know how that's going.
I attended the National School Start Time Conference recently, and we heard a lot of data from a lot of schools around the country that have implemented later school start times, and including really big school districts in Virginia and in other states, and they've seen really nothing but positive results that have lasted for quite a while. In terms of many different factors, including depression, rates of substance abuse, car crashes, even crime after school, things like this. Even the cleanliness of the school, the janitors remarked that it was just a cleaner place because there wasn't so many cans of energy drink and coffee cups and things in the morning from the students, and that the students all just seemed to be happier and in a better mood overall. So so there is a lot of data from other school districts that really looks very positive.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, the studies that I'm aware of that have looked at this change systematically, this research first began about 20 years ago in Minneapolis, but about 400 districts that I'm aware of now across the United States have made the change. I know from talking to Quaker Valley so far, they're pleased. They're talking about now making a shift to 8:30 to try to be more in line with the recommendations. So we don't really know we don't have much data about change in the local region. We know that none of our school districts in the county are at this 8:30 recommendation. The best is 8 o'clock that we have right now, and that's only a small minority of districts in our particular, in Western Pennsylvania. But the districts that have looked at, there was a publication that just came out this spring that looked at 29 different high schools that had shifted to 8:30, and interestingly, they saw statistically significant increases in both the attendance rate as well as the graduation rate. So a higher proportion of students were graduating, jumped from 79% to 88% after 2 years of this shift. There was another report in 2014 by Kala Wallstrom who found, again, across looking in 7 different states, that the schools that started the later the school started, the greater the percentage of kids who reported getting 8 or more hours of sleep, and that was also associated with things like higher grades, less depression, less absenteeism. So it seems, I'm aware of no study that shows a harmful effect of doing it.
Okay, thank you. Emily tells me as we scroll further down Slido, there are multiple questions from parents asking if students will be part of the survey and which students. So they will be receiving the survey next Tuesday. It will be grades 5 through 12. Yes?
So just for the students, as we talked to Hanover Research, the recommendation was that maybe grades 1 through 4, kindergarten through 4, might be a little challenge to answer the questions. But parents, all parents will get it. K through 12 parents across the board will get the survey.
Okay. Lots of hands going up. I'm going to go front, back, side to side. Yes.
So back over to the grade weighting panel. It sounds like you look at the whole student, but weighting still matters. So kind of going back to a previous question and looking at what the options are on this page, what would you think is the most effective way to still weight or not weight classes and evaluate the whole student in the process?
Truly, it's a tough question to answer, to be completely honest with you. Because, as we've all said, we look at students holistically, but for us, for the most part, we're going to look at the GPA and the classes that they're taking. So, like some of the recommendations that they've, considered on this sheet and on the screen above, with giving AP and honor courses the same weight, capping the number of courses a student can receive, maintain the current weighting policy. I think students are still going to want to take those classes, whether or not that they're weighted. So it's really a double-edged sword. For us, like I've said, it's kind of, it doesn't make a difference. The classes that they're taking are really what we're looking at. What it comes down to, though, are those kind of middle of the fence students. For example, we have a pre-med agreement with LECOM. They have to meet a certain standard in order to get into that agreement. Same thing with our honors program. They have to meet a certain GPA. Same thing with our nursing program, just as David has said, with those specific programs, there's different requirements. And so for us, if your student might have a weighted GPA, that meets that requirement, but you're giving us the unweighted, we don't know that, so we're using whatever the school is giving us. So if they meet that requirement unweighted, fantastic. But if they are a student that is only going to meet that with the weighted GPA, that's where you get into that fine line, because another student from, say, Mount Lebanon or another school district might have the same GPA, but we're using theirs weighted, and so they get that seat in the nursing program and your student doesn't. So I hate to, play the devil's advocate, but truly, all of the recommendations I think are great, and it's truly up to the school district with what you guys decide to do. But we're going to be looking at, I don't want to say just the numbers because we're not, but when it comes down to those decision makers, like a certain GPA for a certain program, that's going to be a big factor in, whether it's weighted or unweighted.
Yeah, so I'll clarify by saying that we calculate an unweighted GPA anyway, so we want to remove the weighting because weighting scales are different from every high school in the country, and since we get applications from over 40 different countries, we need a way to sort of standardize things a bit, and that's why we spend so much time looking at what's offered in the high school, what courses is a student taking, how do those courses relate to what they want to study. Basically the only courses we don't count in that calculation would be driver's ed and gym. So if those are the only courses you're taking, might be disadvantaged there, but no student's going to be disadvantaged in our process. We're looking for as many reasons to admit a student. We're looking to see if they're going to be successful and contribute to campus. So hopefully that kind of clarifies it, at least from our end.
Okay, thank you. This woman is the Samina Award. You've had your hand up for about 5 minutes. Student.
I'm aware that when grade weighting is removed, students won't take as many AP classes because it's harder to get an A in an AP, and the grade weighting acts as a safety net. So all three of you have said that you look at curriculum and how hard the student has pushed themselves as made available to by the high school. When you're looking at how hard classes the student took, do you take into account whether or not the high school had weighted or unweighted GPAs? Because people are less likely to take AP classes without weight.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. It's a great question. In fact, we love seeing students taking AP courses at a school that is not weighted because it shows that they are very serious about their academics here. They want to use that course as a way to prepare themselves for college. It shows us that they're a strong candidate for a program at our school, that they're going to be able to come and be successful. So we do absolutely look at that. So great question.
Okay, somebody in the back.
Thank you. I did come from work a little after 7:30, so if this was answered once, I apologize. But I have children in elementary school, and looking at this handout, and this was something I knew anyway, but it's validated that they said the recommended amount of sleep, ages 6 to 12, is 9 to 12 hours per night. They need even more than the older children. And so I guess I'm wondering why it's even on the table having recommendations where we start elementary school kids earlier.
The main reason, and I've had elementary school kids too, the main reason that we're looking at starting elementary school kids before high school kids and middle school kids is that high school, middle school kids can't fall asleep before about 11 p.m. So it's not an option for them to go to bed at 9. We would like to think so, but their circadian rhythms, and I'll let the scientists talk to that, don't allow them to go to sleep as early as elementary school kids can do. But like I said, I would rather everybody didn't have to go to school early.
Yeah, so there really is this biological shift that happens during adolescence where, as Liz was saying, they they have this later time to go to bed and a later time to wake, and it's hormonally driven. It happens even in other animals. We see that in monkeys and rodents. They have a similar shift that happens during adolescence. If you take the hormones away from those animals, then you do away with the shift. So we know this is a real biological thing that happens during this time period. And but younger kids, they don't have that shift yet, and so they are able to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier with less problem. But it is, maybe starting earlier than 7:30 for anybody might be hard.
Okay, thank you. So, iPads have now been incorporated into the elementary curriculum, and our young children are expected to use devices in the evening to complete their homework. Can someone speak to circadian rhythms, sleep, and electronics before bedtime as this relates to our young children getting up earlier for school?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So, circadian rhythms are controlled by the environment, and the biggest contributor to how rhythms are regulated is light. So light comes in through the eyes and can directly impact the circadian clock, and especially blue light is the light that really is the wavelength that penetrates the clock to the clock and really resets it. Light at night is becoming a huge problem, especially with the use of electronic devices. And we know also that adolescents are more sensitive to the effects of light. So if they're using an electronic device at night, it can actually push their rhythms even further and create even more of a problem. Now, some of the electronic devices, iPads, they do have filters available that you can use and put on them. Some computer screens do too, that will block out that blue light. So that's somewhat helpful in trying to not have that effect of the light at night. But it is best really, particularly in the hours right before bed, to put the electronic devices away and not have them use them during those times. But there are, as I said, there are filters that you can use if they have to use them at night.
Okay, thank you. Let's go in the middle this time.
Thanks. I guess my question is, the AP and the honors classes, it sounds like the colleges still like to see those classes. So I don't think taking the weighting off of it is necessarily going to lower the stress, because kids are going to still take the classes, and I think that's what this gentleman in the front was saying before. So is that somewhere where we need to start looking at the homework and things like that, which I was really glad that Dr. Sheard said that was another part that the school district is going to look at. So I know from going on college visits and that you're still, and doing the college applications for my oldest son, that you still put down, whether it's an AP course or an honors course. So that's always, I think, going to matter. So I don't know that taking the weighting off of it is going to lower stress. If that's the idea, is to lower stress by taking the weighting away. So I don't know if if we need to start looking at homework as a lowering stress for those courses.
Sure. So I will say we don't know how much homework you do when we get your college applications, but we do expect that you're taking an appropriate amount to do well in the course. But what we're much more concerned with is not necessarily is a student taking every AP course under the sun. If a student's, let's say, applying to one of our STEM programs like engineering, we probably expect they're going to have advanced calculus, advanced physics, but maybe they decide AP US history isn't their forte, and it's not of interest to them, and so they take an honors or they take a regular course. And those are things that, again, we're contextualizing based on the program they're applying to. We'd rather see students challenging themselves in the domains that they're interested in terms of what they want to study in college, not necessarily overloading and taking every single AP course for 4 years of high school. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, well, on Slido, well-timed question. How would dropping the weighted grades affect your view of the school district? So I guess the question is, would it, and how?
Personally, I don't think that it would cause a difference in how we view the school district. if you were to say get rid of all of your AP classes and all of your honors classes, then maybe that might, change the conversation a little bit. But truly, still providing those, whether they're weighted or not, shows that you're giving your students opportunities to advance themselves. Weighting, like I said, really isn't that much of a stress factor for us that we would, look down on NA for doing that, or dislike, the transcripts that we're receiving that are or aren't. The true thing is, whether or not they're still offering those AP and honors classes, because then that, like I said, is giving your students those opportunities to learn more, be more successful, get a lot more in depth in those areas of interest that they're looking at.
I just want to add also, yeah, I agree 100%. It would not change our opinion at all of the school district. We have many students at Duquesne that come out of non-weighted programs. They are in our physical therapy program, our physician assistant program. They're getting accepted to some of our most rigorous programs. So again, the weighted versus unweighted, the students are still getting an equal opportunity to be accepted. So we won't look any differently at a North Allegheny student whatsoever.
All right, let me ask a follow-up. I know I'm only the moderator here, but I've heard for decades where certain school districts have a different level of esteem as far as admissions go. So when you're at a competitive district, like North Allegheny, like some of the others, how much of a difference does that make regardless of weighted grades versus maybe some other districts that aren't as rigorous and or competitive?
Sure. So that's again where the contextual piece of our process comes into play. We evaluate students based on the high school environment that they're in. We don't compare students to the high school down the street or across the country or around the globe, because you're not in that high school. We're going to evaluate you based on the experiences that you're having. In your case here at NA, if you're at Mount Lebanon, we're going to evaluate you based on your experiences at Mount Lebanon, because those are the opportunities you have. So we rely a lot on our relationships with counselors in schools, our relationships with school districts, to know what that classroom environment is like, what those courses are like. So I'll say you guys are lucky to have some of the challenging courses that you have access to here. We, in our process, in our model, we want to see that students are taking advantage of at least some of those courses. And so we're going to evaluate, like I said, we're going to evaluate students based on how are they doing in their unique circumstances that affect their performance.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? Yes.
So is there any studies out there about students with their stress, with their weighted grades, about how parents influence that? Because I think that maybe part of the student stress may be parents encouraging students to take AP honors and multiple of them to get that highest GPA, when it's really maybe not the students who want to do that. Is that maybe contributing to some of this stress?
Good question.
I'm sure it does, absolutely. I'm sure you know some of those parents. I can tell you don't have to take 5 AP classes to get into university, to get into a college. You don't have to. We want a student to be as competitive as possible. We have students that come from school districts that maybe don't have the resources that a North Allegheny does. Sometimes they don't have AP courses, so they're doing the best with what they're given, and they come to Duquesne and they're great students. So, again, it goes back to just really finding the best of that individual student, reading what they submit, and going from there.
Okay. We've been hammering this panel. Let's give them a break. Does anybody have a question about start times? Yes.
Well, I came tonight because I don't have a horse in this race anymore, and I thought my perspective might be somewhat useful to you all, because my view of start times would have been very different if you had asked me 15 years ago. When my children were little, I would have said, oh, how can you even think of changing the elementary start time? I've got a nanny coming at such and such a time who has to leave at such and such a time. I've got to be back. Oh, this is going to be a mess. Well, my husband and I are the parents of 2 NA graduates, one in 2015 and one in 2017, just this June. And when they started high school, I saw them just become absolutely exhausted. They could not pull themselves out of bed in the morning. They slept through their early classes. They came home from school, either right after school if they were lucky, or after rehearsals and sports and all these things, and fell into bed. Then they would get up and work on their homework, and then go to bed very late, and then sleep a few hours, and then start the whole thing all over again. So I am going to work around to a question, but I want to offer that perspective to you, because I think if you're an elementary school parent and you try to block this now, you may regret it a great deal later on. I have been amused and a little rueful when our children, who are both in universities now, have reported in the first term. I say, "How are you, honey?" They say, "Oh, I feel so much better. I'm getting so much sleep. I don't have to be to class. I picked a class that starts at 9. And so I think that this is an excellent thing for our kids' health. I would not have realized that when they were little. The question I have for the panel is, has any research been done? These schools, I think you said 400 different districts have changed the start times. Has there been enough time to look into how kids coming from those programs might have done better in college because they did not come in with the enormous sleep deficit that my children have?
So I would love to see those studies done where we follow kids over the long term and really see what the long-term gains are. Like, that's really would be the powerful evidence to say these changes are really long duration. But I can tell you that if your kids are in school and they're spending a lot of their classes sleeping, they're not getting as much out of it, and they're probably not doing as well. There have been a couple economic analyses done. They're complicated to understand. I don't quite understand them completely myself, but what they do show is that the overall cost-benefit ratio is actually favorable because of the increased ability that people will do for having a higher percentage of kids be at school, higher graduation rates, higher grades, higher SAT scores have been shown to be linked toward schools that have started later. So there would be suggestion that that's true, but I don't think there's any good hard evidence that says that later school district students then have better performing college students. I just don't think we know that.
Okay, thank you. You're just getting up? Okay. That's good. Somebody new there. Thank you.
So have you actually found any direct link between the weighted GPA and stress? Because as a student of NA, I haven't found the weighted GPA to be a problem. I've found that the workload that I'm receiving is overloading me, and I feel like that's the issue, not the weighted GPA, because that sort of incentivizes me to push myself forth rather than incentivizing me to overload myself. I think the teachers are doing that rather than me. I think I signed up for higher level courses to allow myself to expand my intellect, not to get that GPA, but it certainly is a bonus. So.
Well, you definitely don't want to overload yourself, and I think that's a lot of the topic here tonight, so maybe for that panel also, but from much where you start to see yourself doing worse in the classroom, that's not going to help you either. Taking 5, 6 APs, high stress, could end up hurting you ultimately, if you don't do well in those because of the time and you're involved in all these activities. So it's for you and your family to find that right balance, to help you be very successful here. So.
Do you guys care more about the AP test scores or the grade in the AP class?
For Clarion, at least, like if you are taking the test, you want to get the credit for it, then we're going to look more strongly at the test scores. If you are a student that is just taking the class because you want to take it, you want to, advance yourself, get a grade in it, then we're going to look at that grade. But if you are taking it for that, that college coursework, then we're definitely going to look at that grade scale. So truly, it's really up to you for what you're using it for. If you are using it to save some money and get those college credits to transfer in to the university that you're looking at, then you do want to look at those test scores and how well you're doing on them. AP is a great resource, especially for the tests and getting the credits to transfer, because there are some that you're awarded 8 credits for. If it's a science and a lab, you're getting 3 credits for, 4 credits for, 5 credits for. So it's definitely a fantastic resource for you if you are looking at it, not only the academic side, but also the cost savings, because you're paying for that AP test, which I really don't. I know it's a little bit affordable, a lot more affordable than credits are going to be. Maybe 1,000, 1,500 might be for a credit, compared to this AP class that you're going to pay $100 for maybe, and then have that transfer in. So truly for you as a student, it depends on what you're using it for. If you are wanting it, obviously the academic side, but also cost saving and transferring those credits in, then it's a fantastic resource, and we'll look at that. But if you are truly just taking it to take it, learn, build off of it, then we are going to look at that grade for you.
I know that some people, even if they get a 4 or a 5 on the AP test, still don't use that to skip a class in college. So if that's the case and you did take the test, but still you're recommended to not skip the class in college, how does that affect it?
I know for some cases it's per program, and it is usually per university. And so, for Clarion, for example, you might take that, I don't know, the, biology, and you receive the lab for it, but as a nursing major, we're going to want you to take it on campus because they want to teach it to you. And so truly, it's kind of an early shot for you, but if you have a university in mind, that's a great question to ask, or even maybe do some research on their website if you are looking for a specific major. For a lot of students, we encourage them to take, obviously the classes that you're interested in, but some of them too are the gen eds, the English, comp, and literature, because pretty much everywhere you're going to have to take a general education English, and unless you're an English major, you can usually use that credit to count towards that. So where it gets a little bit tricky sometimes is in those sciences and maths, because they might want you to take that specifically on their campus per major. But again, like I said, it is occasionally, a per institution thing.
Real quick question for the other panel. Should this delay in start time go into effect, can it be started effectively during still this school year, as in like next February? If you vote in January, can you start it in February, or do you have to wait all the way till the following fall?
I can't speak for the district, of course, but I'm guessing it would probably have to wait till the fall, because there are so many scheduling things that have already been done. The contract's already been signed with the school bus company. Is that right?
It would be very challenging to even consider it this school year. I think trying to do it at the beginning of next school year means a lot of things have to take place in a very quick order, and we know that based upon some of the research, it says 6 months is a good lead time, which is why then if we have some decisions made potentially in January, it gives us 8 months then to really kind of think through the next school year. So there is some rationale behind that, but good question.
I mean, I think that the science is pretty clear about the benefits, but that's only one side of the story. Making a change to the schedule impacts the whole community, right? When we go to work, when childcare arrangements happen, when people work. I mean, there's just many factors, when the teachers come. And so I think it's great that you guys are considering this based on the science, and I think it's great that you can have the time to have input because it is a tricky thing to do, and a lot of adjustments have to be made. And I just will also point out that of these over 400 districts that now have made the change, only one that I'm aware of went back. Everybody was happy with it except for one district, and that district sprung their change on really quickly, and we think that may have been the reason why it wasn't ultimately liked.
Okay, thank you. I think, Dr. Shearer, you answered the next Slido question. Is there enough time that not for now immediately, but it's going to take several months in the following school year? All right, let's get to the audience.
So it has been mentioned several times about the benefits of moving the start time. Can you summarize the magnitude of the benefit? What are we talking about here? Is it a depression reduction rate of 5%, 80%? I mean, it's a big change for all the families in the district. So what is the amount that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that I wish we had even better research to have definitive answers about what those effect sizes are. What I can tell you and what I'm a little more familiar with are what we know about looking at dose-response relationships between how much sleep individuals get and their risk for other problems. So as each hour less of sleep adolescents get or report getting, so 8 hours versus 7 hours versus 6 versus 5, there's a clear dose-response relationship with higher rates of problems like depression, suicide, substance use, as well as things important to the school like academic performance. So we're talking like, for example, adolescents who get 6 hours of sleep versus 8, twice as likely, a 200% increase in the likelihood of developing depression. That's pretty big. Now, that's not necessarily going to say we'll see a 200% improvement if we change school start times. But what you will see is a much higher percentage of kids getting an adequate amount of sleep, which we then think in turn buffers them from these adverse consequences. So I wish I had a better number for you to say like, okay, what is the percentage change we see after making the school start change? And I don't actually have those numbers, at least in my head, and I think we probably don't have as much research on that as we would like to have. But the idea from a public health, population health, we're gonna see a greater percentage of kids getting what we think is a sufficient amount of sleep, which means we should see reductions in these negative consequences.
Yeah, and a lot of the data that I've seen has actually looked at things, not just like depression and suicide and things like that, but also just general behavior and risk-taking and impulsivity and aggression and things like that. And there you really see big numbers when you look at differences in sleep-deprived kids versus non-sleep-deprived kids. There was one statistic that blew me away that was, you know, when they were looking at kids that had little sleep, compared to kids that were getting adequate sleep, they saw a 90% increase in sexual activity that they regretted later. And also just other kind of risk-taking and aggressive behaviors that they later would regret. So there is a lot of data on this, but as Peter said, it's hard to put exact numbers, and it kind of depends on where the students are starting in each individual school district to be able to really know where they're going to go from that baseline.
That was actually the next question on Slido. Because these are going to be archived, we've got 17 more questions online. We're going to stick to the audience for the next several. We have about 10 minutes to go.
So I'm a student at North Allegheny, and so I can definitely attest to the fact that a lot of the students that are taking AP and honors courses can sometimes feel overloaded with the amount of work that we're receiving, and that can impact the amount of sleep that we get. However, from the standpoint of a lot of different people, including both parents and students, I've heard a lot of talk about people saying that that's pushing back start times would actually cause students to stay up later as a result. I'm just wondering, is there any research that can prove that this is accurate or inaccurate, and if this is an accurate statement at all.
All right. So this was going back to the original district that sort of started this groundswell in the country was back in the mid 90s when Minneapolis, which was a huge public school system, actually Edwina was a neighboring district, made the change based on the evidence of what we know about adolescent sleep. So it was the first change based on sort of sleep science. And then based on their positive effects, the Minneapolis school system made the change. And the biggest thing everyone thought was you push the start time back, everyone's just going to stay up later. And that's not exact. They didn't find that at all. What they found was kids were getting over an hour of extra sleep per their report with the school start time, and then they 10 years later did a follow-up, and those gains were maintained. So there is some degree in which people have the opportunity to stay up later if they want, but in general, that's been shown not to be so much the case, partly because we think it's a little more consistent with adolescent biology. But certainly you could stay up later if you want to.
Don't stay up later. And you know, what happens when you get adequate sleep, and I'm sure everybody here can compare a day when you have not slept well with a day when you have or haven't slept long enough. You're better able to learn. Your homework is going to go more easily and faster on the nights when you get enough sleep. You know, so I think that's one reason for that we see those differences.
Okay, thank you.
Very quickly, for the GPA table, I appreciate the work that you do in reviewing these transcripts and applications, but you have a limited staff, and most of the institutions I'm aware of have an initial first screen where they immediately dismiss applications. Is GPA potentially one of those factors? And would North Allegheny students, several of them, possibly not make your first cut based on that GPA limitation?
So I'll say in our process, we get about a little over 30,000 applications. We read every single one of them. That includes every essay. That includes every transcript. We have no cut points. We have no minimum SAT scores. If a student applies without SAT scores, they might not be competitive. They're probably not going to get it admitted, but we're still going to read the application. If a document's missing, we're still going to read the application because that's how we build a unique and interesting and dynamic class. I hope that at least clarifies that in our office, we don't use any sort of line in the sand. And we have a full-time staff of 20, which we nearly double with additional reviewers who we train in the exact same manner as our full-time staff to really understand, you know, what does this course mean? What does this grade in this class mean and this curriculum trajectory over the span of 4 years? But I'll let you guys speak for your schools.
Same for Duquesne. We don't have an automated cut system. We get a large volume of applications, but we also review. But I think it's important for students and families, I think, David, you mentioned this earlier, to understand the schools you're applying to, because there are schools like that you mentioned. So I think it's important to do some research, start early in the process, communicating to those schools you might be looking at, because that might come up. So, but I can speak to our school. We don't. We're the same way. We review every application that comes in. We look at everything they submit. So I'm sure you're similar.
Yeah, same thing for Clarion. A little bit less of the number of applications. We get it probably around 2,000-3,000 for an incoming class. That's usually around 1,000. But we use only our admissions counselors to review applications. There is a one-time review. So we're not doing a cut process. Where we're looking directly at the GPA. Didn't make the cut. On to the next one. We're looking at each individual student. We occasionally have like maybe a committee student where they might be maybe potentially an at-risk student, but there's never that like cut line in the sand. You don't meet these job qualifications, so we're not even interviewing you. It's more of a, like kind of we've all said, a holistic approach. We're gonna look at everything you've provided us, essay recommendation letters, and figure out what's the best action to take with that student.
Hi, I'm saying this as a parent who wants my cake and wants to eat it too. I definitely want my elementary school children, when they are older, to be able to go to school at a later time. I do 100% agree that the school start times for the later children are early. What I'm concerned about is making a decision now that we decide on just because no other school has made a decision that has been turned back. I worked in an open office environment and kept being told how wonderful open office environments are because people don't turn back, and I hated every single second of it and found it to be detrimental. I've also heard that there are no studies to the contrary, but there actually was a study of 718 schools in Kentucky that showed that schools that were like our school, so with the lower percentages of some of the free and reduced lunches that you might see in some of the other parts of the country, actually did show a detrimental, they show higher absentee rates for elementary school students, lower test scores for elementary school students, and I can't remember what the third one was, but it was basically like for the children that started as early as 7:30, it was schools that started as late as 8:30 were far better than 7:30. So I just, first of all, wanted to hear the panel's approach on that, and also wanted to make some of the other parents aware that not every early start time for elementary schools are the same. Some of them start at 9, some of them start at 8:30. 7:45, in my opinion, is getting a lot closer to that 7:30 time frame. And there are a lot of kids in kindergarten through 5th grade. And so this will impact a large body of the NA school body.
So the Kentucky study, I'm a little bit familiar with. And I know there was some trouble with their data, and it also takes place over 2 different time zones, I think, or part of those districts don't change for daylight savings time. In Kentucky, like in Indiana, there are some places like that. So the reaction that I've heard is that the data wasn't terrific on that study. I think you're right that getting close to 7:30 is early for younger children. It's early for everybody. But I think we also see, those of us with elementary school children, that they're up and ready to go. Their bodies are ready to get out the door and start learning earlier than the older kids. And it gets difficult unless you want to shorten the school day and then go longer into summer, which maybe we could think about, but I'm not sure the teachers union would like that so much. It's difficult to then start high school late enough to be able to get, if you start high school too late, then you're practicing athletics in the dark. So there are only so many hours of daylight available, and we can't afford, unfortunately, to do what everybody used to do, which is to send everybody to school at the same time, around 8, say, or 8:30, because it costs millions and millions of dollars more to have just one bus run. Anyone?
Thank you. All right, it's 8:30. We have time for one last question. Please know, I see that we're up to 45 questions on Slido. They will all be reviewed. There will be an FAQ document over the next several days and week to come that address whatever questions we didn't get to. So, last question.
Thank you very much. A comment to the school district. We have a panel up here on the school start time that is absolutely loaded in favor of starting later. We have no opposite opinion up there. There's 2 sides to everything. So a little disappointing there. I'll get to my point quickly. I was a swimming coach here for 35 years. Our kids had to be on the pool deck at 5:30 in the morning. They're in the water at 5:45. Consistently over 35 years, they had some of the highest grade point averages in the entire district. When I talked to my fellow swim coaches all across the state and in other areas of the country, same thing was true. If your research is correct, how is that possible? Their brains don't turn on. And yet these kids are some of the best kids that we have in the district. When I was a swimmer, we found that during the competitive season, when we had morning practice, our grade points were higher than when we had more time and could sleep in. So in my mind, there's some real issues with some of the research that I'm hearing because there's such, I guess what I'm saying is so evident, there's a lot of evidence that shows that there's some incongruities here that need to be explained. Thank you.
Thank you. That's true. I see that with, my daughter was a rower in high school, and they have similar hours, and they have the highest grade point averages in the schools. And one thing I will say as a parent, we see that the highest performing kids, like the swimmers and the rowers, really get the least out of a start time change. The kids who change the most are the ones who are already at risk. The kids who come from less economically advantaged families whose parents are not willing or able to drive them to those really early morning practices. So when you add in the general population to those scholar athletes that we love, that's where you get the data that's been worked on for these 20 years. You want to go to this?
Yeah, I would just follow up on that. There's a wide variation in how kids adapt to early morning, and some kids, and the ones that you're talking about, are probably the ones that can really deal with it well and are the most adaptable. But there are a lot of other kids that really have a very, very difficult time. And those are the kids that are really at risk for a lot of later problems, psychiatric disorders, problems with academic performance. So, kids are different. Some kids are okay with getting up early, but there are a lot of kids, though, that that can't adapt the way that those swimmers can. So I think it's recognizing that variability and knowing that as a whole, the data shows that this is helpful in a broad way. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you're bringing up an important point for us to be able to recognize that there are great individual differences, and chances are we know that biologically across different cultures, even in animal species, but cultures, non-Western cultures, Western cultures, there is a delay in circadian rhythms. The hormones that we release that help regulate our biological clocks, they delay as we go through puberty, and they get later by 1 to 3 hours. But of course, there's wide variety there. Some people have more of a delay than others, and some people can handle sleep loss better than others. So chances are there's self-selection that the kids who can't handle getting up that early just wouldn't make it into your program. So I'm glad that some people were able to do that, but probably not what we know when we look across the whole population of adolescents. It doesn't work out for everybody.
So I do want to thank everyone for their feedback this evening, whether you participated in this room, having your questions answered, whether you are at home on the live stream and asking them electronically. What we will do over these next few days is start to take some of those questions that have been asked, particularly the ones that have been liked more than others, so that, again, there's a capacity to what we hope to be able to answer before you take that survey to give you the feedback, again, that will help you make an informed decision. That was the purpose of this evening, to help educate you on what we were looking at, why we were looking at these things, and then to bring some folks to the table who can provide some perspective on that. So thank you very much. For those of you that have a child here, you know where the child care rooms are. Please don't forget your student, and have a great day.